I wasn't supposed to be there that late. The building had already gone quiet, the kind of silence that makes you feel like you're trespassing even if you aren't. The only sound was the low hum of the air conditioner and the occasional creak of the old wooden floor beneath my steps. I was carrying a folder I needed to drop off, trying not to draw attention to myself, when I heard the sound of heels clicking lightly against the hallway tiles. She appeared from around the corner, poised, graceful, the kind of presence that seemed to quiet the space around her. Her hair fell just past her shoulders, dark and smooth, framing a face that carried both confidence and the faintest trace of tiredness. She looked like someone who had dealt with a long day, yet still managed to hold herself together with the kind of dignity you can't fake. I froze, folder in hand, suddenly aware of how out of place I looked. Her eyes landed on me, sharp but not unkind, curious rather than accusing. For a moment, it felt like she could read exactly why I was there, and exactly what I was thinking. "You know," she said softly, her voice calm but edged with warning, "you could get in trouble being here after hours." The way she said it wasn't harsh. It was almost playful, though her expression stayed serious, like she was testing me, waiting to see how I'd respond. I shifted the folder awkwardly, trying to think of something reasonable to say, but what slipped out instead was the truth wrapped in a smile. "With you?" I asked, my tone low, careful. "I'll risk it." Her eyes widened slightly, not offended, more like caught off guard. The corner of her mouth curved just enough to betray that she wasn't expecting such a reply. She didn't laugh, but the silence that followed was filled with something heavier than words. She walked past me then, close enough that the faint trace of her perfume lingered in the air between us. A subtle, warm scent that stayed with me longer than it should have. She stopped just a step behind, glanced back over her shoulder, and raised an eyebrow. "Careful," she said, her tone softer this time, almost amused. Not everyone would take that answer the same way I did. And then she was gone, the sound of her heels echoing down the hall, leaving me standing there with a folder in hand and my pulse racing faster than I'd ever admit. I told myself it was just a brief encounter, nothing more than a passing moment. But the truth was, her voice, her presence, the way she looked at me, it didn't feel like something I could forget. It felt like the start of something I wasn't prepared for, yet couldn't help but want. I didn't expect to see her again so soon. After that night, I told myself it had just been a passing encounter, a sharp spark in an otherwise ordinary routine. But life has a way of folding paths back together when you least expect it. She was there again, a few days later, standing by the long table stacked with papers, her reading glasses resting halfway down her nose. I walked in carrying a box, pretending not to notice her at first, though my eyes kept drifting in her direction. She glanced up at me briefly, then back down at her work, as if she wasn't going to acknowledge me at all. But then, without looking up, she said quietly, "You're late." It wasn't an accusation, more like a casual observation. Still, it made me smile. She remembered me. "Better late than never," I replied, setting the box down on the table across from her. Her eyes lifted, sharp and searching, and for a moment it felt like she was measuring me again. I half expected her to dismiss me with a polite nod, the way people do when they don't want to be bothered. But instead, she pushed a stray strand of hair behind her ear and asked, "Do you ever do things on time?" The question hung between us, more personal than professional. I chuckled softly, leaning against the table. "Depends on who's asking." That earned me the smallest of smiles, faint but real. From then on, our encounters seemed to multiply. A shared task here, a misplaced document there. Each time, the conversations grew longer, slipping further away from small talk. She asked about my studies, my goals, my family. And though she tried to keep her tone casual, I could tell she was listening more carefully than she let on. I noticed things too. The way she tapped a pen against her notebook when she was thinking, or how she would lower her voice when the room was too quiet, as though she didn't want anyone else to overhear. Sometimes, when we sat side by side, our shoulders would brush lightly. Neither of us moved away. One evening, I found myself staying later than necessary just to help her sort through a pile of papers. Our hands reached for the same sheet, and her fingers brushed mine. She froze for half a second, then pulled back, slipping the paper free as though nothing had happened. But I saw it, the way her breath caught, the faint shift in her expression. "Don't read too much into this," she murmured, eyes fixed on the documents in front of her. I should have nodded and let it pass. But I couldn't ignore the way her gaze lingered on me when she thought I wasn't looking. In that moment I realized it wasn't just me. Whatever this was, fragile, unspoken, it was growing between us. Quietly, steadily, and neither of us seemed ready to stop it. The rain started without warning. One moment the sky was gray and heavy. The next it was spilling down in sheets, drumming against the windows like impatient fingers. I had just finished up my work when I noticed her standing by the doorway, looking out at the storm. She didn't see me at first. Her arms were folded lightly across her chest, her lips pressed together in thought. There was something about the way she stood, calm on the outside, but with a heaviness she carried quietly. When she turned and saw me, her brow lifted slightly. "You're still here." I held up the folder I was carrying. "Thought I'd wait it out. Not really a fan of running through a storm." She gave a small laugh, soft and almost reluctant, before looking back outside. "Neither am I. But it looks like we don't have a choice." A pause stretched between us. The building was empty, save for the hum of the lights and the constant rhythm of the rain. I found myself stepping closer, not too close, just enough to stand beside her at the doorway. "You ever notice," I said quietly, "how storms make everything feel different? Like the world slows down, just for a while." She glanced at me then, her eyes thoughtful. "Or maybe it just feels slower because we're finally forced to stop." Her words hung in the air, heavier than I expected. For a moment, I could almost see past the surface, past the confident exterior she always carried, into something softer, lonelier. I hesitated, then spoke before I could overthink it. "I like being around you." Her head turned sharply, her eyes searching mine. "Don't," she whispered. Not harsh, not angry, just fragile. "I mean it," I said, my voice steadier now. "You make things feel different, better." The silence that followed was filled only by the sound of rain hammering the glass. She looked away, her jaw tightening, then exhaled slowly. "This isn't wise," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "I know," I admitted, "but I can't pretend I don't feel it." Her shoulders softened just slightly, and for a moment her guard slipped. She reached for her bag, fumbling with the strap, and in the process her hand brushed against mine. It was accidental, maybe, but she didn't pull away right away. Instead, she let it linger, just for a heartbeat too long. I could feel the warmth of her skin, the quiet tremor of her hesitation. Then, just as quickly, she pulled back, slipping her hand away as though nothing had happened. "You shouldn't say things like that," she whispered, her eyes fixed firmly on the storm outside. But the way her voice wavered, the way she didn't walk away, it told me more than any confession ever could. And for the first time I knew she felt it too. The days after that storm felt different. Nothing had been said outright, but something had shifted between us. Every glance lasted a little longer. Every silence carried more weight. One evening, I found myself helping her again. Papers scattered across the desk, the two of us working side by side in the dim glow of the desk lamp. The building was quiet, everyone else long gone, leaving only the scratch of her pen and the sound of my breathing. I leaned back in my chair, stretching my arms, when she slid a document toward me. Our hands touched. Not just a passing brush this time, but her fingers resting lightly on my wrist. It was brief, almost absent-minded, yet it felt deliberate in the way she didn't pull back right away. The warmth of her touch spread through me faster than I could control. I glanced at her, and for the first time, she didn't avoid my eyes. Her gaze lingered, steady, unreadable. Then, as if catching herself, she cleared her throat and returned to her papers, withdrawing her hand with a slight tremor. "Sorry," she murmured, her tone lower than usual. "There's nothing to be sorry for," I said softly, leaning forward now, my voice quieter, closer. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she kept writing, though I noticed her handwriting had grown uneven, the lines of her letters wavering slightly. The silence stretched, filled with the hum of electricity and the faint rustle of paper. Finally, she set her pen down and leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. Her eyes found mine again, but this time there was no shield in them, only conflict. "You're playing with fire," she said, her voice steady but hushed. I could hear the warning, but I also caught the subtle shift in her tone. Less resistance, more longing. "Maybe," I admitted, "but so are you." For a long moment, neither of us moved. The space between us felt charged, like the air before lightning strikes. My knee brushed against hers under the desk, and she didn't move away. Instead, her breath caught, almost imperceptibly, and she shifted just enough to close the gap further. The closeness wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, fragile, but undeniable. Her eyes flicked to my lips for the briefest second before returning to my gaze. That single glance sent my pulse racing, though I stayed still, not daring to push too far. Then she looked down, her lips pressing into a faint, conflicted smile. "You're too young to know what this could cost," she whispered. "Maybe," I said softly, "but I'm old enough to know what I want." She let out a shaky breath, half a laugh, half a sigh, before standing abruptly and gathering her things. But as she passed by, her hand brushed against my shoulder, lingering just long enough to feel intentional. And though she left without another word, I knew the line we'd been balancing on had already been crossed. It was late again when I found her sitting alone in the break room, the light above humming softly. She wasn't working this time. Instead, she was sitting with a cup of tea cradled between her hands, staring at nothing in particular. I hesitated at the doorway, not wanting to intrude, but something in the way her shoulders slumped told me she wasn't as composed as she usually was. "You're quiet tonight," I said softly, stepping inside. She glanced up, her eyes tired but warm, and gestured faintly toward the chair across from her. "Sit if you want. I could use the company." I joined her, the table between us suddenly feeling too wide, like it kept me further away than I wanted to be. She traced the rim of her mug with one finger, thoughtful, almost restless. "Funny," she said after a long pause. "People think confidence means you never doubt yourself. Truth is, it just means you learn how to hide it." Her words carried weight. Not rehearsed, not guarded, but real. I stayed silent, letting her go on at her own pace. "I've made mistakes," she admitted, her voice low. "And I've been careful ever since, maybe too careful. It's exhausting sometimes, pretending everything is fine." I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table. "You don't have to pretend with me." Her eyes lifted to mine, surprised by the certainty in my voice. For a moment, she looked younger. Not in age, but in the way her expression softened, stripped of the walls she usually kept up. "I don't know why I trust you," she whispered, almost to herself. Without thinking too hard, I reached across the table, my hand finding hers. Her fingers were cool at first, hesitant. But when I gently closed my hand around hers, she didn't pull away. The silence between us deepened, heavy but comforting. I could feel the faint tremor in her touch, the quiet weight of her vulnerability pressed into my palm. "You carry so much," I said softly, "but you don't have to carry it alone." Her lips parted, as though she wanted to argue, but instead she exhaled, long and unsteady. Slowly, she shifted closer, her chair scraping softly against the floor. And then, almost without realizing it, she leaned toward me, her cheek brushing against my shoulder. The warmth of her skin through the thin fabric of my shirt sent a shiver through me, but I didn't move. I just sat there, letting her rest, letting her breathe. For a long time, neither of us spoke. I could hear the quiet steadiness of her breathing, feel the way her body relaxed, little by little, against mine. Finally, in a voice barely audible, she said, "I shouldn't let myself need this." I turned my head slightly, my cheek brushing the top of her hair. "Then don't think of it as need. Think of it as letting yourself be human." She didn't answer, but she didn't move away either. And in that fragile moment, I knew, whatever line we'd been fighting not to cross, her heart had already stepped past it. After that night in the break room, something between us shifted. She wasn't just guarded anymore. She was conflicted. I could feel it in the way she looked at me, as if she wanted to let herself lean in but kept reminding herself of the danger. It all came to a head one afternoon. We were reviewing a stack of papers in her office. The door closed, sunlight streaming through the blinds in broken lines across her desk. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every small sound sharper. The scratch of a pen, the shuffle of papers, the faint catch of her breath. At one point, our hands found the same folder. This time she didn't pull away. My fingers covered hers, steady, deliberate. Her eyes flicked up to mine, wide and searching, and for a moment, nothing else existed. Then footsteps. We froze. The sound of shoes against the hallway tiles grew louder, approaching her office. She snatched her hand back, almost dropping the folder. I sat up straighter, forcing myself to look casual, though my heart was pounding. A shadow passed by the glass window on her door, lingering for a second before moving on. The handle didn't turn. Whoever it was kept walking, but the silence left behind felt suffocating. She pressed a hand to her forehead, exhaling sharply. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," she whispered, almost more to herself than to me. I stayed quiet, watching her gather her composure. The way she smoothed her blouse, straightened the papers, pretending nothing had happened. But her hands shook slightly, betraying her calm. Finally, she looked at me, her eyes dark with worry. "Do you understand what this could do to me? If anyone thought—" She broke off, biting her lip. "I know," I said softly, leaning forward. "I know the risks, but it's not just you. It's me too." Her gaze softened, but only for a heartbeat. "No," she said, shaking her head. "You're young. If people talk, it won't ruin you. It'll ruin me." I held her eyes, refusing to look away. "Then let it ruin me instead." Her lips parted, startled by the weight of my words. For a long moment we just sat there, silence stretching between us, the tension almost unbearable. She looked down, folding her hands together tightly. "You don't know what you're saying." "I do," I said, my voice steady, certain. "I've never been more sure of anything." Her shoulders slumped, the fight in her giving way to something more fragile. She looked at me again, and this time, there was no denial in her eyes. Only longing and fear tangled together. The office felt too small, too charged, too dangerous. She stood abruptly, moving toward the window as though she needed air. I stayed seated, letting the moment breathe, even as my pulse raced. When she finally spoke again, her voice was softer. "You don't make this easy." And though she turned away, I caught the faintest trace of a smile in her reflection on the glass. The kind of smile that told me, despite everything, she didn't want me to stop. The days that followed were quiet, almost too quiet. She avoided me at first, keeping conversations clipped, her eyes trained on her work instead of me. It wasn't coldness, it was fear. I could feel it in the way she pulled away, not because she wanted to, but because she thought she had to. I told myself to respect the distance, to let her decide. But when you've already felt the weight of someone's hand linger in yours, when you've seen the walls they guard themselves with begin to crack, you can't just go back to pretending. It was late on a Friday when I found her again, sitting in her office, the blinds half drawn, the glow of the lamp soft against her face. She didn't look surprised to see me. If anything, it was as though she had been waiting, though she'd never admit it out loud. "You're still here," she said, her tone neutral, her eyes tired. "So are you," I replied, stepping inside and closing the door behind me. She let out a quiet sigh, setting her pen down. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Then, finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can do this." I took a slow breath, choosing my words carefully. "You don't have to decide everything right now. But you don't have to keep running from it either." Her eyes flicked up to mine, sharp, searching, and then softened. "You don't understand. People will judge. They'll talk. They'll think." "Let them," I interrupted gently. "They don't know us. They don't feel what we feel." She shook her head, a faint, conflicted smile tugging at her lips. "You make it sound so simple." I stepped closer, not too close, but close enough that she could feel the sincerity in my presence. "It's not simple. It's terrifying. But it's real. And that's what matters." For a moment, she just sat there, silent, her fingers twisting lightly together on the desk. Then, with a trembling exhale, she reached out. Not much, just enough for her hand to brush mine. This time, I didn't hesitate. I closed my hand around hers, steady and certain. Her skin was warm, her grip hesitant at first, then firmer, as if she was allowing herself to finally lean into it. She stood slowly, and I rose with her. For a long time, we didn't speak. She just let her head rest lightly against my shoulder, her breath soft against my collar, and I held her hand like it was something fragile, something I couldn't risk letting go of. After a while, she whispered, "You really would risk it, wouldn't you?" I smiled, tightening my hold just slightly. "Every time." She let out a quiet laugh, half relief, half surrender, and in that moment the world outside, the rules, the judgment, the fear, all of it faded. What remained was simple, steady, and real. Her hand in mine, her heart finally opening, and the unspoken promise that neither of us would face the risk alone.